we're going to move on to the next. So Dan Bain is my partner in crime at the University of Pittsburgh. We've been doing and providing free water testing for people with private water wells for over a decade now. And we have thousands of data points and whatnot as far as, you know, if there's any question about, and I'll be talking about that in a little bit, but we have a couple of talks here about water contamination. You all set to go, Dan?
I guess so. So the first one is Jennifer Baka.
Yes. Jennifer, if you want to come up.
And so first presentation, this portion of the day is from Jennifer Baka at Penn State. She's got co-authors Sue Brantley, Nat Warner, Tao Wen, Allison Finsky, Jianfeng Su, Laura Williams, Brandon Forsyth, Casey Pinto, Zachary Bitzer, and Evelyn Mahugu.
Thank you, everybody, for inviting me. And thank you for so much help I've received to do this research from so many of you here in the audience. This is a study that we've been doing, funded by HEI Energy, and it's been going on for the last 3 years. The component that I'm going to present today is some water sampling we've been able to do over the last year. The results are quite fresh, and our analysis is preliminary. We just presented it to the HEI Research Committee yesterday, so I'm really excited to be here to present this information to you, and I look forward to future discussions. I'll have my contact info at the end, because consider this as a start of a conversation, okay? Let's see. Oh, is it here? Yes. And how do I? Oh, excellent. So fancy. The state school that is Penn State does not have such technology, so thank you. Hopefully I don't accidentally turn it off. All right. So here's just 2 previous papers of many. These are 2 that were led by Sam Shaheen, who was a student of Sue Brantley's. And a lot of this early research on whether or not fracking has contaminated groundwater found that, you know, there's been localized, relatively infrequent incidences of where that brine that we keep talking about has contaminated groundwater sources in close proximity to fracking wells. Okay, so that's just some previous research that we've done in our group. And in the first phase of our HEI work, we concluded that that relatively infrequent contamination was most likely caused from spilling the wastewater as it's transported to injection wells and these residual waste processing facilities, or spills from those impoundments that you saw so many aerial pictures of from Bob's work, okay? Important caveats here, a lot of the water sampling that informed these studies and many others were water samples done back in 2014 and earlier. So we don't have a lot of updated information as to whether this contamination is ongoing and persistent. So that's what's motivating this year-long study we've been doing as part of the second phase of our research, okay? So what we're doing, working down in southwestern Pennsylvania, those 3 counties, Washington, you've been hearing a lot about those. We went into those areas over the last year to gather water samples in these areas of that infrequent contamination that we found in the early phases of the research. We call those hotspots. And then we also look for water samples near spills and impoundments. Okay, so we're looking in those areas to see if there's evidence of water contamination. And then we have some control samples in here. Okay. So that's the overall motivation of this study. Okay, and so we do some statistical analysis of the water samples that we were able to gather. And then just as a reminder, I'm sure folks are relatively aware of this, but private groundwater wells in Pennsylvania, there's no water regulations required. And you don't even have to tell the government where the well exists. So it was a little bit of a needle in a haystack to find homes in these treatment control areas had wells, but we were successful in finding 97 homes that were willing to participate in our study. But since there's no standards, there was no baseline testing for us to compare to. But what we do in this study is compare to safe drinking water standards established by the EPA. So you'll see in the slides, MCL's maximum contaminant load. So that's a primary drinking water standard for the EPA. Those are things that the EPA thinks could cause health risks. And then SMCL, secondary standards. Those are things that the EPA would regulate in our municipal drinking water, primarily for aesthetic reasons. So to not have pink rings in your toilets or nasty smells in your home. So SMCL is not associated with the health risk per se. MCL is associated with the health risk. And so that's what we're comparing to. All right. So over the course of 7 trips from May to November, we were very fortunate and grateful. Many of the groups here in the room helped make this possible. We were able to get 95 samples in largely private drinking water wells, but we also did some stream samples. Here's our field team there at a stream. And then particularly to study those spill sites, we also did gather some stream samples as well, okay? But largely from private groundwater wells and people's homes. And we took the water sample before it would go through any treatment in a person's home. So the water that we tested is not necessarily reflective of what people are drinking because we wanted to capture it as close to the groundwater source as possible. So just a caveat there. All right. Here's the distribution of those samples in the, the spill sites, which are brown, the hot spots are pink, and the impoundment sites that Bob had such great aerial photographs of, those are in yellow, and then the triangles are where we actually got the samples. A little anecdote from the field, the control band is that those blue Mickey Mouse ears, if you will. In the course of field work, unfortunately, there were some more spills that happened. And we were able to, in real time, in our 6th and 7th field campaigns, go down into Greene County and southern Washington County and gather some samples from those spill sites. But that impacted our control site because you want to have a control that was distant from wells and the spills, but we thought it was prudent to go in and get fresh samples since the spills were so recent. Okay, so that's a limitation of the study, if you will, because we had to, that shrunk our number of controls from 30 down to 7 because of that recent spill accident. All right. Here's what we sampled. Most water testing that's done in labs focuses on those anions. So everybody talks about salt, and perhaps that's frustrating to folks. A lot of labs, a lot of the commercial labs are set up well to test the chlorides and the salts. They don't have the equipment to test for the trace metals and the radon. We're fortunate at Penn State that we do have such labs. Nat Warner's whole research program is for testing radiation in water. Okay, so he is set up. And he's the one taking the lead on the radiation analysis. All right. There you go. I'm going to start with presenting the results of the radiation testing. This is ongoing. We tested 3 radionuclides, radon, gross alpha, and radium. Radon we did in the field at the time of sample. Do exceed the recommended MCL of 300 picograms per liter, but thankfully none of them exceeded the per liter. I'm using those. Okay, and as I'll show you, radon values we're finding in southwestern Pennsylvania do seem to be similar to we thankfully didn't find any gross alpha above detection limits. And our radium analysis is ongoing because it takes a long time to run these samples. It's 4 days per sample to test this value. So we anticipate having all the radium values complete by late summer, given the 39 that have already been run in Nat's lab. We're thankfully not finding any that exceed the MCL of 5 picocuries per liter. But again, take the radium values as the most preliminary since we're not done with the samples. Radon activity in our controls to the hotspot impoundment and spills. We do see a slight elevation in radon in those spill areas compared to our control, but you plot that in relation to the typical radon values across Pennsylvania as measured by the U.S. Geological Survey. So not Dan and Justin values from their research. We do find, and that's the orange box down on the far right, radon values we measured in southwestern Pennsylvania do seem typical of the standard values in the USGS database. Okay. All right. Now, turning to the geochemistry analysis, so the non-radioactive species that we studied. Sorry for the word salad on this slide. This is the slide that just summarizes our results, comparing those analytes to the MCLs and SMs. Those above MCLs. The things that I want to point you to is that 20 samples exceeded the SMCLs for aluminum, iron, and manganese. Here's one that we're still thinking through, and I know that John's presentation is going to, push this one down the field. We did find 46 samples that exceeded for lithium, but there is one being discussed in the literature. We do find samples about that. We're noting it. We don't really do much with it right now because it hasn't been linked in the literature right yet to health effects related. But I welcome any feedback from the audience on that. Okay, and then 5 samples exceeded SMCLs for chloride and barium. That's our salts. Previous studies of our own. People study the salts because hazardous materials from those brines that could also be moving to the surface, traveling with the salts. Okay. The rocks, it attaches to the salt and it comes up. Okay, so we found concentrations, and then 4 samples exceeded the action levels for dissolved methane in the gas. So the DEP has a recommended monitoring level 7 milligrams per liter, and then one of those 4 samples exceeded the Department of Interior's immediate action level of 28 milligrams per liter. Okay, and then in case anyone's concerned, I call owners who exceeded the methane levels and the barium level, encouraging them to work with the DEP to have their water tested again. Okay, so just because those how do we then go about figuring out what's related to unconventional that had high sulfates, also had low pH. Low pH is something that's usually indicative of acid drainage and coal mining. Again, southwestern Pennsylvania, this long legacy of energy development. We think that those values are best explained by those homes being in close proximity to coal mining. Many were undermined, okay? 5 samples that had high salt levels. We do further testing to see if those salt species look like the Marcellus brines, because we have a characterization of that. So you're basically doing a fingerprint analysis. If you think that your Marcellus brine looks like this, we take our water sample and kind of overlay it. Like, is there a similar footprint? Four of those, the four samples that surface or lower down in the Marcellus Basin. Okay, so that's the geochemistry analysis. So I'll present that to you now. Okay. So here on the salts, one of the markers, thank you, that we do is the strontium isotopic signature. Knowing from the U.S. Geological Survey what those fingerprints look like, that's the orange box. That's what we think that the strontium signature for would look like, and then you see on the far right what our control spill impoundment and hotspot distributions look like. Doesn't look like a lot of statistical variation there. Okay, so that's indicative that the signature we're not seeing possible evidence of UD influence on the salts. I wish I had a laser pointer there. Oh, there is. Is it? I'm gonna. Oh, thank you. Okay. Well, so basically, the saltiest, like the samples with the highest levels of chloride, do seem to line up with that finger, the Marcellus brine. But most of our samples, are over here, not looking like it's influenced. And then here's that gas finger. And so here's thermogenic. I knew I was going to do that. Here's what thermogenic. Here's the biogenic gas. And here's our samples with dissolved methane. One of them looks like it might be a deep gas. Okay. All right. So just some summary there. We're not finding overwhelming evidence that these salts and gases are related to the Marcellus brines, but and so what we do here are those statistical tests, just comparing the controls and the treatments. And I know I only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to rush through this, but comparing the hot spots, the spills, and the impoundments to the controls, using these two statistics. These elements on the right, so that is nitrates, potassium, radon, copper, lead, and benzene. They seem statistically significant increase. They're higher in our treatments than our controls. But remember, this is an area with a lot of different land use practices. These elements in blue often are associated with agriculture. So what we do then is take those spring samples out of our data set, because there's a cow photobombing us up there on the hill there. So just to kind of control for the possible influence of agriculture, the stream samples out, I'm sorry, spring samples out, rerun those tests, and now it's just copper that comes up as statistically significant. But those copper samples are from spill sites that also have low pH, so we also have an influence of acid mine drainage here. So just challenges of isolating effects in this legacy extractive region. Okay? And so another thing we do is a basic linear regression to try to look at the relationship between the concentrations of these species and the distance to one of our treatment areas. And when we do that regression analysis, iron comes up as the only statistically significant analyte. So it has a slight tendency to be higher near spill sites than control sites. Okay? All right, so just some conclusions. But we need to probe further to understand the statistically significant relationships for potassium, radon, copper, near the hotspots and spills, and iron. Okay. Also, to think there would be a possible channel here. High salt correlating as well. So we think that if our results hold, and we're going to keep doing some statistical analysis, some more rocks here, but the possible contamination method here might be a radon gas. So think of it, if you're opening up a can of soda, how your carbonation dissolves out first. We think that might be the possible pathway for radon showing up in the water. And then the iron might be mobilized by bubbles. You're disturbing water and, causing some agitation, and that's causing the iron to move as a particle into the water. So that's our explanations as of now. We welcome your feedback and happy to share results as we continue to do our statistical analysis. All right, and if anybody wants to see more, you can go on this website, which documents all of the different research we've done for the HAI project, and there is my contact information. Okay.
Thanks, sit up there.
Excellent.
For the rest of
I'm gonna go grab my drink then.
Sounds great.